I'm happy to introduce today Ms. Catherine Vernon, who will moderate the next panel on how women play a unique role in building consensus. Ms. Vernon currently serves as Vice President and General Counsel for Formica Corporation and the Formica Group. Previously, Ms. Vernon served as in-house litigation counsel for the international accounting firm Ernst & Young, in corporate and international trade law with Brouse McDowell, and senior corporate counsel and assistant secretary at Philips Medical. Ms. Vernon earned a BA from Miami University and Oxford, Ohio, and her JD from Case Western Reserve University School of Law with honors. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Vernon back to Case.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel. I'm sorry to tell you that one of our panelists, unfortunately, is caught up in some deal negotiations, so Valerie Sachs will not be with us today, but nonetheless, we have a stellar panel, a mixture of both inside and outside counsel with many, many decades of strong experience. Nice. Okay, sorry, but you're not at a 35. And, you know, this is a panel discussion, a peer exchange. We're hoping to have a dialogue with you, not so much as a lecture. And our format makes it a little bit difficult because of the webcasting. We have the mics on stands, so I'm not going to be able to walk a mic around to you, but please feel free, unless you're right here, and I can't see you. But please feel free to jump up. Maybe it's easier to get out with fewer people in the seats, and ask your questions. We're anticipating that you interrupt, that you start having an exchange with us, because we want to hear your issues, your questions, what's important to you, what you want to get out of this session. So I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce the panel, and then each of the panelists is going to give us a little background about what they do and how their departments are organized, and then we'll kick off into the question and answers on how skilled women lawyers build consensus, our topic for the next 45, well, it's getting into the time now. Actually, we only have until 12:15, so about 50 minutes, I'd say. And we'll clip along on the questions for 30 or 40 minutes, depending on how active that's going, and then we'll save time in the end for those of you who saved your questions to the end of the discussion. Does that sound workable to everybody? Okay, great. All right, start thinking about your questions. We have here on our panel Len Cullo, who graciously agreed to dive into this women's world topic and give a male perspective, and we really appreciated working with you, and we've had several phone calls to prepare, and it's quite interesting to get the male perspective on some of the issues that we're facing. We have down beside him Mara Cushwa. I should say, sorry, you have the bios, but let me explain a little bit of background about Len before I move on to Laura. He's a vice president and treasurer at H.J. Heinz Company, and Len is a lawyer masquerading as a CPA, or maybe it's vice versa, because if you read his bio, he does move back and forth throughout his career in both of those positions, but has a lot of experience in managing lawyers, and particularly female lawyers, and consensus building issues. Mara Cushwa beside him, a 90 grad of Case, is a partner at Calfee, Halter, Griswold. She's chair of their real estate department. She has 22 years experience. Beside that is Suzanne Hanselman, a partner with Baker McKenzie, 21 years.
Hostetler.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
That was
another Baker.
Major faux pas. My apologies. Baker Hostetler, 21 years, who heads their business group there. She's a securities and corporate governance lawyer. Then at the end of the panel, we have Heather Lennox, who's a partner with Jones Day, 20 years experience. She's a corporate restructuring attorney with a lot of bankruptcy experience. So that's just the bare bones of our panel, and I'd like each of them, though, now to take a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes each, to explain your department, your organization, and how you work, so you get the lay of the land. Len, would you like to start?
I guess a little reverse male starts first here. You know, one of the things that I was struck listening to some of the other panelists, and it might be, there's three of us now that I think earn our living using our law degree outside of the general counsel. Is a lot of similarities, some of them, I mean, serendipity and finance having a big part of my career. And I grew up in Solon and went to Notre Dame and was a CPA tax accountant for a couple of years down in Cleveland before I came here to Case. And like David, although I like taxes as a, intellectual study, tax returns were not fun. Besides the fact that you had to do busy season in tax coincided during the NCAA basketball tournament, and I didn't like missing that, so I had to find something else. So I came to Case and thought I was going to be a tax lawyer, and I think I graduated in '85, so what are we, 27, 37? I can forget the math. I'm not that good at it, and decided, well, when I was getting out, I had a couple offers. I had an offer with the IRS. I had an offer with BP America's tax department, where I had worked as an intern, and then I had a corporate offer for a firm down in Dayton, and I said, it's the mid-'80s. They're talking about a flat tax, and then if I go into tax law, that's just gonna be unemployed. So I decided to take the corporate office job offer, and went down there, and they said, you'd like to be in the securities department. Sounded pretty good to me. He said, you took securities law, right? And I kind of mumbled something because the answer was, I didn't. Like David, I didn't really like the professor who taught securities law. I'm pretty sure he's retired as well. So I kind of mumbled that in, and that got in, and in part because I was a CPA, I think I had that knowledge. So I worked at that law firm for a couple of years, moved to Pittsburgh, worked for a small, medium-sized bank, and again, serendipity. Somebody walked around on a Thursday, said, this is in the late '80s, and their banking problem, they're going to fire the whole law department on Friday. All right, well, so obviously we stopped working, and but somebody said, did you see that Heinz is looking for a securities lawyer? It was in the Post-Gazette, that past Sunday, and one, I hadn't been looking for a job, and two, I didn't really think about looking in the paper for it, but I called my wife, and she got it out of the garbage. We found it. So I got to Heinz, and have been at Heinz for 22 years. First part of it was in the general counsel's office, and I was an associate general counsel, and then about 11 years ago, I moved to be treasurer. So we've heard it a couple of times, but I would like to reiterate it. I mean, the finance background, being a CPA, allowed me to have the flexibility to do something different. And when I was interviewing for the job, I told the chairman that, really this was the only other job in the company that I'd want to do other than being a corporate securities lawyer. Unfortunately, I got the job, and most days it's better. I enjoy being treasurer, and I enjoy supervising the lawyers. So I went from, being a producer of legal work to a consumer of legal work. And just real quickly on Heinz, and hopefully you all know the catch-up, and I'm sure you all use it because I got to put my 6 kids through college. But Heinz actually now, and we've developed, is 70% overseas or outside of the U.S. So one of the things that says, just by its very nature, we, Heinz, have become a much more diverse company. And in general, when you with food, you make it where you sell it. So we don't export ketchup to places. We make, and we don't necessarily force ketchup to places where they don't. In China, we do soy sauce, and India, we actually make a form of Gatorade and things. So it just, as I said, we have a very diverse company all around, and it's also forced world headquarters to have that diversity. I think that's enough on me.
Thanks, Len. Mara, would you like to give us some remarks on your career, your
My
present
career path.
position.
Well, I'm not one of the lawyers in the room that knew she wanted to be a lawyer when she was in 3rd grade. I came to the practice of law because I came to the legal education with some of my classmates in the room. I actually was, like Len, I went to Notre Dame undergrad, and I went on our semester abroad program that was actually in London. And in London, the undergraduates shared a classroom building with the 2nd-year law students who were studying international law. So the undergraduates' classrooms were on the lower level, and on the ground level was the sort of law program. And I was invited to participate and listen and sit in on lectures, and met the law students who are actually sort of our dorm proctors, rectors, whatever you want to call them. And it was fascinating to me. It was a completely different way of learning. And I knew leaving London, not only did I have a great experience and a broader education for having been there, but I desperately wanted to go to law school, much to my father's chagrin, because I'm sure he thought, well, no, you really should come home and finish undergraduate and get a job. And I went to law school. So I came to the practice of law because I liked the education, I liked the method of thinking, and it was in law school I met then Dean Korngold, who was a professor who taught me originally property law, and then went on to take multiple classes, including real estate transactions and finance, and that was one of those aha moments, and I loved it. I loved real estate transactions and finance, a little continuity in the finance theme. And I loved him, and I loved his enthusiasm for what he did as a lawyer. So he was terrific, wasn't he? And because he was such a terrific professor, he also became interim dean of the business school, and then ultimately dean of the law school. So it's that sort of really dynamic ability to sort of master a number of talents, and to be a really good people person and a great leader. He was very inspiring to me. So that was sort of my foray into real estate. And then I was a summer associate at Calfee, and I basically never left. So I had this, back to Laura's theme of finding good people and good places, good bosses. I felt a fit. I knew immediately I would have both sponsors and mentors within the firm. There were women leaders, there were women partners. And I had a heck of a lot of fun. I worked like a crazy woman during the course of the summer. I think it was a 12-week program, and I did like 27 projects. None was related to the other, and I really liked what I did. I think I really hated my ERISA project, so that ruled out one area of law. Sorry for all the ERISA people in the world. Do we have any ERISA practitioners? And I had a really sort of esoteric tax problem, and we had a really funny, odd, peculiar, but wonderful tax partner who scared me, but I ended up loving him. And after struggling mightily with this assignment all summer, he did willingly admit that it would have been a difficult project for a mid-level tax associate. But having sort of weathered that project, I kind of ruled tax out. I felt like, okay, I just aged about 10 years, and I'm done with tax. So I had this love of real estate from law school, and I loved the practice group at Calfee, and I loved the people within the group, and I loved that it was a small group within a large firm, and I really love making things. So I not only like the practice of law, but I really like walking around the community and saying, yeah, we did the finance for that. Yeah, we helped build that. Yeah, we were part of that purchase and sale transaction, what have you. And now I get to say, yeah, I love our new office. And one of my partners from work is here, and we really do love our new home. And that was a mere 900 hours of non-billable time for me, but I really love our new project. So I really love seeing things come up out of the ground and be created and become a part of business. So I like business transactions, I like real estate, and that is how I came to my practice. I now chair our practice group. I serve on our executive committee. I'm at a firm where I think 7 or 8 of our practice groups are chaired by women, so I do have great leadership and great partners and sponsors. I chair our hiring committee because I, like panelists on the other panel, believe strongly and firmly in attracting, developing, and retaining good people. It's what we do, it's what we sell, it's what we make. And I serve on our diversity committee because, like all the general counsels, diversity is important to our work environment. So that's what I do in my practice world, and I'm also a mom. I have 2 elder daughters by marriage, 1 lawyer and 1 doctor, and a 4-year-old with my husband who's over at the music settlement. And we may hear her screaming around at the botanical gardens at lunchtime, so if she's there, I apologize. And I like to serve on some boards in the community. So I suffer to try for a little balance in life.
Thanks, Mara. Suzanne, tell us about being a securities and corporate
Sure.
government
Well,
lawyer
there's some common
at Baker
themes.
Hostetler.
And I think one is that I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a lawyer. In fact, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I started at Miami University in special education, which didn't last a long time. And then ended up after 4 years kind of trying a little bit of everything and winding up with 4, majors and nothing to market myself with. So a classical liberal arts major. But I spent some time in Europe and had really enjoyed that. So I decided to try a new city, having grown up in Ohio. I grew up in Cleveland. So I went to Chicago, decided to get my MBA. I knew I wanted to get some kind of postgraduate degree. So was in a management training program with an investment bank, ready to start on my MBA and I now have to define it by year, when the market crashed in 1987. And in my management training program, a lot of the work I was doing was working with our outside counsel on securities offerings. I didn't understand the legal part. I did what I was told, but it was actually Chapman and Cutler, and it was a partner at Chapman and Cutler that really encouraged me to think about going to law school. And so while I was still at the investment bank, I took some special project work from the GC's office and decided that was what I wanted to do. So kind of unusual in that I started law school with an interest in corporate and securities. I went to Ohio State because it was, I still had the ability to have in-state tuition in Ohio. Probably wouldn't work anymore, but it did then. And the intent was really probably to go back to Naveen, where I had been in Chicago. And so was surprised to find myself as a second year in the fall interviewing with big law firms, because I didn't think that's what I'd ever do. But, and if I did, I thought it would be a few years. So interviewed extensively in Cleveland, 7 law firms in Cleveland, a few in Chicago, a couple in DC, and 1 in New York, and was a summer associate at Baker, and never left. It's really, I think these are the common themes. It's the finding great people to work with. At the time, there weren't a lot of women partners in the business group at Baker, but there were a lot of men that shared common values with me. Their family was very important to them. You could see it. They, strive to be able to spend time with their kids and with their spouses, and that was really important. And it's been very supportive over the time. I think it's sort of a luxury. I've had 4 maternity leaves, so there's been times that I've been away from the firm, and I always find myself missing it. And wanting to go back. So that's always been a good kind of check to make sure you're still where you want to be. My practice at this point, I kind of progressed typically through. I was an associate and young. It's interesting. I did do a maternity leave at every level. I did one as a very young associate, then as an associate on the brink of making partner, and we have a dual partner structure. Then I did one as a non-equity partner, and my last one is an equity partner. So if anybody wants to know about, managing a maternity leave and transitioning in and out during different phases of your career, happy to. I've also had given birth in every method, but we won't go into that here, but also could share different stories on that. But in the last several years, and we'll talk about this as a panel because I think it came up a lot. Law firms aren't really structured in their management training programs. I came out of an investment banking environment that was very structured. There were paths to move up through the bank, and it was a pretty easy line to follow. You knew where you were going to go if you chose to stay. Law firms aren't really like that. So getting involved in leadership or management is more sometimes just being willing to help out somebody, and then, you know, somebody recognizing you when it's time to look for somebody to take that type position. So as a young associate, I did have interest in management type roles. I've always kind of been interested in HR issues, and so I'm on our hiring committee. I've been on it for several years. Same thing, we have a people business. It's a service business, and not only that, we work a lot of long hours. You want to be surrounded by people that you like to work with, that you have no problem putting in front of clients, so I'm pretty active in that. I'm the head of our business group, which is about 50 attorneys, so that, you know, it involves a lot of training, a lot of hiring, retention, compensation setting. This is the crazy time of year for that. Annual reviews, periodic reviews, that type of thing. And then recently, I've taken on more of a role in our business development program. And there are several people from across the firm that participate in that. So it's been, you know, I don't know if I could have ever looked out. I know there are some people that are so goal-oriented. I mean, I have a partner that talks about putting the envelope in his desk with the 5-year goals and bringing it back out. I don't know, I feel like I'm lucky if I make it through a day at a time. Some days, you know, it's just like trying to get through to the next day. So, but I think, and I heard this earlier, you know, when you have opportunities, sometimes it's hard to be everything, and it's hard to do everything, and sometimes you have to sort of sit back, and if something sounds great but it's just not going to work, you know, you may have to pass something up. And I think, as probably everyone here could say, as you have more opportunities, you really have to start, you know, trying to concentrate on the things that really matter most to you. I feel in a pretty good place right now. You know, my kids are getting a little older. They're all in school now, grades 3rd through freshman in college. So I've just started now getting sort of back in the community on a couple boards, which is something else I really like. So,
Suzanne. Thanks. Mm-hmm. I think you may have identified a topic for our next symposium on work-life balance. I heard a speaker say earlier this week, actually, it's work-life integration. There's never any balance.
Never balance, that's true.
But we could probably all talk about that. Okay, the next panelist, you are up. Heather, please tell us what it's like to be a corporate restructuring attorney.
Sure. I think it's really unusual that we have 3 women attorneys at large law firms on this panel, and not one of us has ever made a move. I've been at Jones Day for 20 years. I'm a lifer. Came out of, you know, did the summer associate there. That's highly unusual in this market, so must say something about the firms. I've been at Jones Day for 20 years, joined the Cleveland office, have been in the Cleveland office my entire career, except for the last couple of years, where I am now splitting my time between Cleveland and New York, because there's an awful lot of restructuring activity that goes on in New York. I am on the firm's advisory committee, which is sort of like the executive committee, and before I started this commuting to New York thing, I was the administrative partner of the Cleveland office for several years, which was great because you learn how law firms run as a business as opposed to just practicing law, which is what, you know, most lawyers do. Thanks. You had asked about what's your practice like. We have an international practice. We have 80 lawyers in the restructuring group worldwide, and the kind of matters that we take on, we do creditor side representations, but we are known for, and I do personally, primarily company side representations. And when you're dealing with a company that's in distress and you're dealing with a large debtor, it's sort of like being the last great bastion of a generalist. You have to know an awful lot about restructuring, and you have to know a little bit about benefits and M&A work and labor law and tax law and securities law, because to restructure a company, you're restructuring everything. And that's what I find fascinating about restructuring. The great thing about restructuring is because you're dealing with all those kinds of specialties, I got to know lots of people in the firm, across the firm. It's not just a Cleveland. I don't just work with Cleveland people. I don't just work with New York people. There's never a project that I do that I'm only working with people in my office. And it's not unusual to be, and I've done this a couple of times in my career where I'm sitting on a conference call and I have a client in a different state. I may be sitting in New York. I've got people domestically from Chicago, San Francisco, and Atlanta on the phone, and then a couple of my partners in London and Germany. And I just think, you know, when I was growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, I didn't think I'd be doing this. So it really is emphasizing how globally interconnected we've become. The other thing that particularly with my practice, I think I get to do, particularly as a company-side restructuring lawyer, is you're dealing with an enormous problem that takes at least months, if not a couple years, to figure out how are you going to sell this company. You're going to try to do a balance sheet restructuring. Does it need an operational restructuring? It can be a variety of different things. And so you're dealing with lots of teams. So when you're running the restructuring, you're heading groups of anywhere between 20 to 80 people at any given time. So not only do you need to build consensus, which is sort of the topic of today's discussion, you need to be a little bit of a drill sergeant and uber organized. And I find that fascinating. It's a challenge. It's sort of an emergency room practice. It's a 24/7 kind of practice because you never know when the next crisis is coming up. But I love it, and so that's sort of my restructuring world.
Thank you. Okay, we've heard how these panelists have ample opportunity for consensus building. We're going to jump into the question and answer period now, and don't forget, you have to participate as well. We're going to start with the general question on how women are well suited as consensus builders. Then we'll move to some more granular topics on particular situational strategies that the panelists may have pursued, and then wrap up with why we think women are well suited to be consensus builders. I'm going to start with a bit of a quote that I stumbled across when I was preparing for this panel. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is quoted as saying, if he had one wish to change the world, he would have more women leaders. We all like that. At the Davos meetings this year, he joked that he may need security to escort him off stage, but he suggested, what we need is a revolution led by women. I think women ought to be saying to us men, you have made a mess, just get out and let us in. At the same summit, there was an Economic Forum Women Leaders dinner in Davos, and the question of leadership for our messy world was again discussed. And the question was, do we need the bold John Wayne style of leadership, or do women see and bring something different? The women leaders that were assembled at the conference included Michelle Bachelet, the former Chilean president, who said, we can't generalize. For good leadership in changing times, one day they need to be the general, the next the consensus builder. So maybe I could start with you, because you raised this issue as being the general. How are women best suited to fill the role of consensus builder versus John Wayne or General Patton?
Well, I completely agree with the point made about sometimes you have to be one thing and sometimes you have to be another. And I think part of what women do in our lives, I mean, we all have children. They're all at various stages of progression. We're all involved in the community, and we're all involved not only in practicing law, but in running our law firms. And in order to do that, you have to be able to deal with time management, deal with scheduling, prioritize what you need to prioritize. And a lot of times, I think that's unique to women because, you know, my husband's fantastic and he pitches in all the time, but I'm the one making the doctor's appointments, I'm the one making sure the kids have what they need for school, on top of everything else that I'm doing. And so being able to, I think, manage all of those roles, balance, well, it's not really a balance, but it's scheduling all of those roles and prioritizing all of those things, I think gives women a lot of flexibility and a lot of real organization in what they do. And a lot of times to bring consensus, you need to be able to cut through a lot of the fluff that's floating around the issue, get to the heart of it, and basically bring people in to talk about what's really important. And I think those kind of skills can help. And I also think that you know, women have a different style, and and different women have different styles. So you really can't generalize. I've seen some very, very hard-charging, very generalissimo women, and I've seen some men that are very, you know, much more touchy-feely and consensus building. So, but I think all of the balancing that women have to do and all the different roles that we have to play in our own lives and in our professional lives, I think helps us try to focus the situation, move the situation along, and bring the parties together to try to in my case, reach a result that is beneficial for the client, but also that everybody else in the room can agree to.
Thanks. You mentioned the mother role. Several of you have mentioned the parenting role, but we discussed how even though husbands are, sharing the load these days, somehow it does seem to fall on the wife, the mother, to make sure the lunches are packed and the birthday cards are ready and the PTA things are done. And Suzanne, you had commented that your husband was very, very good at fulfilling any assigned task you would give him. But how do you think your role?
Well, I mean, I do
feeds into
think
that?
there is something about, the way we have to multitask and I think especially for, sometimes young women, you should think about the skill sets that you've built. Because I think sometimes, and maybe in law firms that can be at least as I was coming out, kind of male dominated. But you should look to the skill sets you build in other areas of your life, and you can see how that does come to play. Because, for example, it is true, managing the schedules of 4 kids and figuring out who needs to be where, when, with what they need. Then, when you bring that to a transaction, and as you said, you have to be organized and organizing, okay, who needs to do what when? I need an ERISA lawyer here, and I need a tax person to look at this. Those are skills that do translate. The logistics, I always think there's probably another great career out there for me once I know how to figure out how to translate the logistics. But I think also on the consensus, and I hate to sort of make it a gender issue, although I think a lot of stereotypes do have some basis oftentimes. When you're building consensus, you're not necessarily you're not trying to have a unanimous decision. You're basically trying to get buy-in from a group of people. And so I do think women are very good listeners. I do think they tend to sometimes maybe sit back more and truly listen and maybe have a higher, EQ or emotional intelligence. And so, because part of that is being able to listen to different people and finding the threads that are common so that, you can maybe reformulate it to make it a little more appealing to everybody. And you probably do this, like, honestly, when you're refereeing fights with your kids too, it's like, okay, you're trying to get, we all need to work as a family. We need to get here. Everyone's not gonna be happy every day, but when we see, what we're all trying to strive for, and it's those very same skills played out on just a very, in a different stage.
So we're multitaskers with lots of emotional intelligence. And I'll add one more criteria. I had a general counsel I worked for, and some of my colleagues must be in the other panel session, but he indicated he only liked to hire Catholic females. Those are his favorite people because of our Catholic guilt. And that we also made good taskmasters that way. Mara or Len, anything to add to that? Any contribution on?
Well, I think just really echoing what Suzanne said, I think that women tend to be a little bit better at ready, aim, fire. And sometimes my male colleagues are a little bit more ready, fire, aim, and then sort of figure it out, clean up. And so I think that is a really important balance. That you need to have the people that are ready to fire, but you also need to take in all the sources of information that make that a very well-informed firing. Do you know what I mean? So I think women do a good job at that. And I think to the emotional quotient, basically, I think that women tend a little bit more naturally to not be afraid of alternatives. If there's a different way of thinking, if it would be helpful to bring yoga into your work environment, or it would be great to go to the Golden Door and take time out of your life and maybe introduce the concept of sabbatical or something into your work environment. I think women are much more sort of open to what's different and why it might be advantageous, and let's consider that. And I think that aspect isn't necessarily seen as where women are more naturally risk takers, but it is in fact an openness to a different kind of risk that doesn't necessarily appeal to or occur to men as naturally.
And we had discussed perhaps because when you walk in the door outside of work, it's a role we sometimes naturally, speaking stereotypically, fall into outside of the work environment. Does anyone else in the audience feel, or how many of you think that maybe your role as a household manager or your life outside helps you when you walk into a meeting? You're the one that wants to take charge and make sure everybody's got their action items and their deadlines and things. Does anybody else feel that way? I see some heads nodding. Yeah, good. All right. Len, you also manage, somebody else. Yes, yes. Wait, you have to wait for the mic. I promised I'd bring the mic.
Thank you. And maybe just to, you know, I'm Colleen Batchelor. Nice to meet everyone. And my point is really just a question on that. So I'm very fortunate. I have a husband who's a stay-at-home parent and has been since our daughter was born. He manages our household and does so extremely effectively. And I have the wonderful opportunity at my company to have 2 other women vice presidents on my team who have stay-at-home husbands, and a growing network within our company of senior director and vice president women who are in a similar position. So maybe I just challenge back to the group: is it less gender and more generational? Are there, and maybe even for some of the the students in the room, what I'm seeing more and more as I look at our employee resource networks for young professionals, there are so many men who are stepping up in very different ways in the workplace. And so for me, I just wonder if there's been a historic way that people have kind of fallen into gender roles, and is that kind of turning itself on its head with the millennials coming up in the workplace today?
So maybe we'll have fewer women general counsels going forward because the trend's going the other way. I don't know. But anyway, who would like to speak to that? Suzanne, do you have something?
Well, I mean, I do think it is generational. I know that, like I think I said, when I was looking at law firms, a lot of times people thought about this as a women's issue, the work-life balance or having families. And I don't really see it as, I see it as a young family issue. In my situation, my husband and I did talk about, okay, we can't both have crazy, we made the decision that we couldn't both have crazy careers. So there was a discussion of, if I were going to stay on the path I was, then he was going to do something different. And he's, in the finance department of a not-for-profit, which was supposed to be lower key, but lately hasn't turned out that way. So I do think I do think there is a shift. And I'm seeing, what's interesting is that I do see, even in our firm, the younger associates that, even if it's not a stay-at-home husband, but there has been some discussion about who's going to kind of take a primary role. And but I do still see, though, that our male associates that have wives that stay home, they don't seem, and I don't know if you find this, they don't seem to be as flexible about
in consensus building.
Well, in consensus building, or even honestly in working in different methods. I mean, they are used to, they want everyone to be in the office the same hours they are. Where I think some of the women who have had to sort of balance things and maybe take a client call while they're at the soccer field, or they seem to be a little more willing and
bribe
open.
your children to be quiet with M&Ms.
Exactly right. You're bribing your kid. Like, if anyone ever, if financial printing, Bound was the financial printer, and then they merged with Donnelly, who made the big Google mistake yesterday. But anyways, for the longest time, there was a conference room at Bound that if you went in, there was this big potted plant in front of a frosted window because my 2-year-old had taken garlic toast and wrote his name. So I think women do, I think it's what you say. There's an openness, a willingness that to do things differently because of that. But I see what you're saying, though, that the generational thing.
There are a lot of books on that. That could be a whole nother symposium topic.
Yeah.
Let's move on to some situational type questions. We sort of laid the groundwork on, how women are better suited. Len, I'm going to direct this to you so we hear from you a little bit. I'm going to start with styles. Overt styles versus behind the scenes consensus building. Do you think the women that you work with operate differently than men in gaining consensus at work? Do women communicate differently? Do we use behind the scenes lobbying more, less? Things that you agree with, don't agree with, or do you see them adapting, or
That's a lot.
You made some comments about that earlier.
Well, you know, I think those that are successful probably have the things, and I think it was Suzanne, but may have been Heather, but talking about listening and active
Listening, that was the key.
And you know, and you do see that in the most effective. You know, having worked in a corporation for most of my career, the consensus, some of the toughest consensus building is negotiation internally and influencing internally, because there's a lot, whether it be some of the people that work for me in Treasury or the lawyers that I work with, one in particular, when we're doing projects, you know, not everything that we're doing is in the hierarchy of Treasury, and we're working with other groups, and you know, so that takes a certain listening, of understanding. It's not fist, you know, you can't pound your fist and say you have to do it, because, you know, they work for the European CEO, and, you know, they can go tell me to screw off if they don't like it. So, you know.
No, they wouldn't really do that.
We're close to it right now, but we've actually, I sent out my lawyer to talk to him, because I was a little
You have your own lawyer inside the company?
I actually, well, essentially I do, and it's kind of nice having done her job and then moved to my job, so it's nice I get her to do the things that I don't want to do, and including.
Is she a good consensus builder?
She
in
is
that
a
role?
good consensus building, and she had to, you know, just recently negotiate with the European Council and try and get everybody, you know, going in the right directions. And I think, you know, her listening skills, her ability to be calm under pressure, and not, you know, not be General Patton in it, has made it successful.
Do we think women are, we think we're good at listening, we're better at listening, that's what gives us an edge in consensus building? Maura, any thoughts on that?
I think, you know, that's obviously, I think, a personal skill
Right.
to a large degree, and I think you can learn it well from people. I certainly know great men who are, you know, great listeners. I think maybe women glean some different things out of conversations or from the information that they're hearing than men do. And so I think the best, result is to understand what everybody heard in the room, men and women, and what they gleaned from the conversation, and pool all of that information together to make the best informed choice, decision, whatever you need to do. But I think we sometimes hear different things from the same report of information.
Let me do it. How many think they're good listeners? How many think they're naturally good listeners? How many had to learn to be a good listener? Yeah, me too. I have a short brain wave, and I'm like hard time focusing on what you're saying, to be honest. So I'm like, on to the next question. I would make a horrible litigator. But you mentioned international context. That's also a very important situational use of consensus building that those of us who work in the international world have had to deal with from time to time. Heather, you've been in some international transactions. As a woman working internationally, do you use different styles to build consensus in different countries? Do you get different reactions? How do you deal with things to get a consensus when you're not on your home turf?
Well, I think you need to understand a little bit about the culture, especially the business culture. The business culture in Japan is very male-dominated, and even to this day, you know, there's some resistance to women or women in positions of authority. And you need to figure out how to deal with that, because that, you know, doesn't exist very much in the U.S. anymore. And so how do you get a group of, I remember I was a very young lawyer, and I was restructuring a steel company whose owner was Japanese. And so we walked into a board meeting, and my senior partner wasn't there that day, and he says, oh yeah, you can handle the board meeting. And I just remember a bunch of, you know, 60-plus-year-old Japanese businessmen, some of whom spoke English, some of whom didn't, coming into the board meeting, and they kept saying, where's our lawyer? And, you know, I'm the woman in the room, and they said, you're our lawyer? You know, they were not used to women having something being able to give them sound business advice.
And were you able to walk in the room and take charge like you normally
Absolutely.
would want to do?
Yeah, you have to. Look, if you're going to survive those situations, you have to, but you have to be respectful about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just can't, you certainly couldn't come into that situation and go guns a-blazing and, expect to have them listen to you or to have the meeting go well. You have to understand the cultural sensitivities when you're dealing overseas.
Cultural sensitivities. I'm sorry, you mentioned Japan. I have to share one of my strangest negotiating stories. I was not long with a medical manufacturing company, and this was the early days of video conferencing. Some of you are laughing. And I had a late night call to Japan with our largest distributor that we were trying to sell a division and do some joint venturing. And so I'm sitting there with the vice president of the division and I. We're the only ones in the room. And for some reason, we couldn't get the camera to work so it would be on our face. So we were kind of sitting crunched under our chairs so our faces would be visible. So that was comical enough. And then the Japanese negotiating team walks in, the very senior department manager, executive of the Japanese company, and his two minions, his two assistants. And, they bow, and when the senior man bows, his comb-over flips up like a rooster. And it stayed that way for almost 2 hours. And it's all we could do to get any consensus built, because we were like kicking each other under the table. And of course, in that culture, no one would ever, if it was me, I'd just go, Lynn. But no one would do that because of the different styles. So I'm sure we all have horror stories like that. So that's the international context. Let's talk about bullies in the room, people who don't play well in the sandbox. How do you deal with a bully on the team or on the other side? Mara, would you like to give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, in talking about it as our panel in preparation for today, I said that sort of unequivocally it was one of the hardest aspects of the job. Certainly difficult when you're a young woman lawyer because I think you really don't know how to get your footing with a bully. And so one of the things I have learned, because in the practice of real estate law, I'm pretty frequently the only woman on a project or a project team. Not as much anymore, but I certainly was when I originally started practicing. And I think I learned both from good role models, but also just from sort of trial and error, that you have to be really informed, well-informed. So, learning your trade, getting comfortable with your skills is hugely important, because you have to have a really strong sense of confidence with bullies. Because you have to know when to engage and when to disengage and get other people involved where it might be advantageous or beneficial to moving things along.
Like decision makers, get higher level people involved?
So as a lawyer, I always am representing a client's interest, and when I feel like there's a bully on the other side, and for me to engage would be deleterious to the whole process. And from my Italian, Irish, redheaded temperament, it is not my base, skill to like disengage and take myself out of that equation. I'd rather strangle him. But it's often much more beneficial to add in the business team. And it's important to know when you have to say to the client, look, I totally understand our position. I can and will represent you, but I really feel like this is a meeting you need to be at, and you need to be out in front, because this person is an obstructionist and we're not going to get past him with me against him. And so I think it's important, number one, to know your craft so that you feel skilled and confident, and you can best represent the client, and you feel good about that. But then you also have to know when to sort of step back and add in other players to just sort of disarm those people.
Mm-hmm. Heather, would you agree with that? You mentioned you had some experiences a few weeks ago. What about backing down? Do you ever back down if there's a bully in the room?
I was just thinking as Mara was talking, it depends, and she's right, you have to know when to engage and when to disengage. my natural reaction is to stand up to a bully, especially if it's on the other side. It's easier to do. You know, we represent clients, we're on the other side, we can be a little adversarial.
It's harder when it's a colleague inside, isn't
Well,
it?
and it's especially hard when it's a client.
Yeah.
I had a case where the CEO of the company was a monstrous bully. Not only to, I mean, he was an equal opportunity bullier. He bullied his team, he bullied the investment bankers, he bullied the financial advisors. And, you know, that's the client. So that's a situation where, you know, you're not going to get up in his face and challenge him. You have to learn how to deal with it. But always, I mean, even when you're managing it and dealing it, you know, you have to do it with some, you know, sense of confidence, sense of your own worth. I mean, I don't care who you are, even if you're a client. I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to be treated incredibly badly. And there were a couple of times where at various things, various people on the team when this particular client was getting particularly bad, would stand up to him politely, but would stand up to him. And I think, you know, you have to know, as Mara said, you have to know when to do that, when not to do that. But particularly when, and frankly, the other, you mentioned it, Catherine, what if they're someone on your team? What if they work for you? And I will say, and I think it's kind of a culture for a lot at Jones Day, but particularly if there's somebody on my team that I think is treating people inappropriately or unprofessionally or being that way, I will talk to them. So that is not what we do. This is how we do it, you know. And
you know, I
you have to
actually
address it.
had to do that. We were in an internal meeting, and a peer of mine, a senior executive, just got out of control on a conference call, and some of my staff were in there and approached me afterward and said, you know, this is really the bad way to run a meeting. I can't believe what he said to an outside lawyer. And I actually took it to the president. I called him in with me. I said, we've got a problem. I've had complaints. So, you know, as a senior staff member, I had a complaint. I felt I needed to help do something about that to change the environment as well, to make it a more consensus building, instead of a controlling, bully pulpit, which is what tended to happen. We're running short on time. I want to get to one or two more questions quickly. Len, I wanted to hear more from your male perspective. I know you said listening certainly works well for you. You have had lots of experience managing women and working with women. What do you do to promote consensus building among your team? Do you advocate for training sessions, formal training of some sort? What do you think we can do to become better consensus builders?
I don't think in my experience with training, I mean, it's really, in some sense, delegation. And there's no substitute to actually doing it and letting them, whether it be the lawyers working with me and maybe just, you know, being quiet, let them do them, and then maybe after the fact talk about whether there was different things. But, you know, I think, one thing on the bullying that I talked to, you know, I think I think confidence, as Morris said, is really one of the keys. I think the other thing that you can is the appropriate use of humor.
That's right. That's a good one.
And then the other,
just diffuse the situation.
The other one that I do is silence. And
Suzanne, I think you advocated that. Just back off.
Sometimes you have to back off.
Just silent, look at them and say, you know, your head, the bubble in your head, really, you, whatever, and somebody that's not outrageous, they might at that point self-regulate.
Well, especially in consensus building, because somebody who's going to fuel off of engaging, if you're in a room full of people and you let that person just spout up, it becomes apparent to everybody else that, wait a second, you know, where's this coming from? So I think, you know, the artful use of backing off. And
so different approaches for different situations, different personalities would perhaps be what we're hearing here. Anybody else have any particular training or books or things that they thought really helped them? I know I mentioned a book. I was sent to a training session in a career at a previous employer on leadership development, and there's a book called How to Get Things Done When You're Not in Charge that has been a lifesaver for me as an in-house lawyer. Just, you know, consensus building, diplomacy type skills. Anybody else have a stellar publication or trainer that, how about in the audience? Anybody have something that they really loved that gave them, you know, everybody's read Getting to Yes, I think. But no, nobody, everybody's a natural consensus builder, do you think? No?
Well, I think when you're a young lawyer, I mean, I have one particular senior partner who's a complete whiz at bringing 12 different diverging opinions and getting to a deal. And, you know, I learned an awful lot working with him when you're young. I mean, I think mentors, you learn a lot by the people that you work with, and you adopt what works for you.
Yeah, we have one partner who's incredibly good at, he can go into a room with an idea or what he wants done, and by the end of the meeting, he's convinced the other person that it was their idea and they're presenting it, and it's just, it's amazing. I've just like been in awe of how he could turn around something, but.
Laura, did you have, I thought somebody had a
question. I was just going to mention, I think it's the Shackelford story, and this is actually something that I hope to incorporate in next year's forum. It's the story of the fellow who led the expedition to the North Pole and lost his, and my friend Bill Lee, who I was talking about earlier, actually teaches this at Harvard as well. It's an incredible, incredible story of leadership and consensus building and realizing when it's time to stop building consensus and make a decision. So that's, whether you see the movie or you read the book or just sort of, there are lots of publications on this, it's a really incredible example of, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, one quick question. I know we're getting it, but I just want to wrap it up with following up on something Laura touched on and something President Snyder touched on, and that's that the Minority Corporate Counsel Association recently reported that women are serving as more general counsels in Fortune 500 companies, currently at 21%, and the Minority Corporate Counsel Association president says they see this trend continuing as more companies recognize the outstanding legal and leadership skills of these professional women. Has our time come as female lawyers in leadership roles? Suzanne, I'm going to ask you to address this. Do you think women lawyers have better consensus building than males? Or we've always been, is it something we've developed, or we've always been good, but the stars have aligned now?
I think it's really the stars have aligned. I mean, I think, you know, we've always been good at it, and you get more, I mean, it's just going to build upon itself as you have more women GCs than, you know, that are hopefully also looking to see diversity at the firms that they're using, and then that will just help the promotion of women within the firms. So I think it's sort of, you know, all kind of comes together.
Len, did you have a comment on that?
Well, as a plug for Heinz, we just actually won an award from the Minority Corporate Counsel for diversity.
Perfect.
So we don't actually have a general counsel that is female right now that we did before, but it does, you know, again, doing your due diligence when you're looking at an employer.
So it's a time when companies are recognizing the need to have females in the C-suite. And one of you had said, we've got lots of excellent women now, given the percentages in law schools. And so the two have finally come together. So let's hope that trend continues. Were there any last questions before we send you to lunch? I'm standing between you and lunch, I'm sorry. No? All right, well, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thanks to all of you.